I'm not mad. Nutcase, Loony bin, the mental house, the madhouse, where the crazies go. Crazy? Nutcase. No, I don't Nut need job. a doc. Loony, madman, madwoman, nutter, the crazy I'm not mad. down the street. Nuthouse, Loony bin, the mental I'm home, not the mad. madhouse, where the crazies go. Nuthouse, nut job, loony, madman, madwoman, nutter, the crazy I'm not mad. down I'm the telling street. you, I'm not crazy. No, I don't need a doctor. I'm not insane. Stop calling me crazy. I don't need the loony bin. Stop calling me crazy. I'm telling you, I'm not mad. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. Happy Easter to you all. Cheers if you got in touch about the midweek episode on catfishing. Be it with your experiences of being catfished or to comment on my new name, Sebastian Sex Sugar. Yeah, thanks. Alright, shout outs. Just a couple. Alice Roberts. Hey Alice, how are you? Your good friend Claire Brudnell, I think that's how you say it, Brudnell, asked for your shout out. So hello Alice. Stephanie Kautzman. Hey Stephanie, keep smiling today. It'll all get better. Take it from me. And hello Foxy, the gift shop in New South Wales. I'm not sure. I know there's two of you that listen, and I know one of you is Roxy, and I don't know who the other person is. So, get in touch, let me know that name, and I'll do it on the next one. Okay? Okay, this episode is going to take us into a world I've wanted to research and try to understand for a while now. This episode is going to be made up of 3 stories, and they take us into the world of insane asylums. Now, just one quick thing to say before we start. It's important to say I am not an expert in this world. Of course I'm not. So, if I ever use in this episode a term which causes any upset, I'm sorry. I've done my best to avoid anything like that happening. But if I'm going to talk about this subject, I just have to talk about it as honestly as I can and use the 3 stories to try and make some kind of point. Okay, so just before we get to story 1, you may hear it and think, bits of this sound really familiar. Why is this story ringing a bell? And it's because this story is the basis for lots of different films, lots of TV shows, a very famous novel, and an Alfred Hitchcock movie. And they all started from this very real story. Okay, let's get to story 1. Why will no one believe me? Okay, let's go. In 1889, a mother and a daughter from London were on holiday in India, and they're heading home to London, but they decide to make a stop in Paris. So this is Clara and her mother. Clara's father had died, and they had really little in the way of family. So really it was just her and her mother, and they were taking an extended trip to India. So they decide on the way home, okay, let's not head straight home to London. Let's stop off for a couple of days in Paris. So 22-year-old Clara and her mother, they get to Paris safely. Now, they got there, and really this is the reason why they wanted to go, is that in Paris, in this year and at that time, they were about to unveil the Eiffel Tower. So of course, this had been reported all around the world as one of the most famous structures that was ever going to be unveiled. And they thought, well, okay, we've got the means, we've got the opportunity. Let's go to Paris and see the unveiling of the Eiffel Tower. So they book a room, and it's in a fairly expensive hotel. Now you can imagine Paris at the time was crazy. People were coming from everywhere to see the Eiffel Tower. So in Clara and her mother go to the hotel that they have booked. They meet the manager at the front desk, and he signs them in. And they're given a room. Room 342. It was a real kind of... They weren't poor, Clara and her mother. It was a real fancy pants kind of apartment. It was described as having heavy plum-coloured curtains, exquisitely designed velvet rose patterned wallpaper, and lavish furniture. Sounds nice. Sounds lovely. When I stayed in Paris, right, I was in a wee shabby hotel just down from the Sacré-Cœur. Lovely. I mean, it was a lovely wee place, but the room, oh my God, no joke, it was so small. I mean, seriously, if I had committed a murder, my prison cell would be bigger than this hotel room. It was fucking tiny. But, you know, it was all that. I think you forgive those things because it's like, oh, it's just Parisian chic. It's just this small room in a hotel in Paris. And so you kind of get swept up in the romanticism of it. As fucking shit and cheesy as that sounds, actually kind of is the truth. Anyway, luckily for Clara and her mother, they didn't have that. They were in quite a posh place. So they go to the room, but quite quickly, Clara's mother begins to feel unwell, and she lies down on the bed. Clara goes to get the manager at reception, and he immediately calls for the local doctor. The doctor arrives, and he goes to see Clara's mother in room 342. After the examination, he says to Clara, go downstairs now and get me the hotel manager. So she does this. Now she's panicked at this point, as you can imagine. She's in a real panic. Her mother's not well. The doctor's now asking for the hotel manager. The manager comes up, and standing there in that bedroom, the doctor and the manager, they start to argue really loudly at each other in French. Clara's standing there, not a clue. She doesn't really speak French, so she doesn't know what's going on. Now this is where it gets stranger. The manager turns to Clara and he says, your mother is seriously ill, mademoiselle. The only medicine that can help her right now is in my doctor's surgery, but it's on the other side of Paris. I don't want to leave your mother, so you must go now and fetch the medicine. So Clara, of course, she's completely disorientated by the whole situation. She agrees, and she's taken outside, and there's a carriage, and it takes her to the doctor's home address. And in her hand, she's got a note in French, which, of course, she can't understand what it says. So the carriage gets to the address, and Clara goes inside. The carriage agrees to wait. It takes an hour and a half for the doctor's assistant to make up the medication. Clara races back in the carriage to the hotel, holding the medicine bottle, eager at this point to know how her mother is. So she gets to the hotel. She is about to head up to room 342 when she meets the manager on the stairs, and now the conversation that they are about to have is just crazy. Clara asks, "How is my mother?" And the manager replies, "I'm sorry, but I don't know what you mean." She says, "My mother, she's ill and I went to get this." And she shows him the bottle of medication. "This is the medication she needs," Clara says. The manager looks really confused and he says to her, "I've never met your mother." So now Clara's like, "What? What the hell is going on here?" She says, "Yes, you have. We both checked in this morning. My mother took ill, you called a doctor, and I went across town to get this medication." And the manager says, "I'm very sorry, mademoiselle, I think you're confused. You checked in alone this morning." She says, "No, I didn't. You signed both me and my mother in." So the manager takes her over to the sign-in book at reception, and Clara sees that she is the only name signed in that morning. Her mother's name isn't there. So right, having had enough of this, Clara's like, "Right, okay, look, some bizarre things happening here. Come up with me, right? Let's go to room 342 and you will see what I'm talking about." And she's also eager to get the medication up to her mum. So they go up, the manager unlocks the room, and what does Clara discover? The room looks different to what she remembers. The furniture is now in a completely different order. The bed, which was against one wall, is now on the other side of the room. The curtains are different. The paintings on the wall are different. But most importantly, her mother isn't in the room. So where is she? Clara is demanding that the manager take her immediately to her mother. He again explains, "You checked in yourself. Your mother, I have never seen. She has never set foot in this hotel." So Clara starts to suspect that she's possibly being tricked. Something's going on here. She demands that the manager, good on her, but she demands that the manager takes her to every room in the hotel until she finds her mother. And so they go room to room. They open every single one. They inconvenience people. They knock on doors. They get all these rooms opened. And at no point can Clara see the original room that had those lovely things that I described. She also just can't see her mother anywhere. So she starts to cry and shout, and she becomes uncontrollably hysterical. So the same doctor is called. He arrives, and Clara says, "Okay, now you must remember my mother. You treated her only a few hours ago. You sent me to your house on the other side of town." And the doctor says, "I have never met you before, and I've certainly never treated your mother." So Clara goes looking for her mother's belongings in the hotel. They must be somewhere. Her bag must be somewhere, but no, the bag doesn't exist. All that she can find is her own belongings. So that night, completely confused, of course she would be, completely and utterly baffled, Clara leaves Paris. She returns to Britain, and she goes straight away to the British Embassy. She explains in detail the story to them, and they listen, and they launch a police investigation. So police from London go across to Paris, and they speak with the manager and the doctor, who continue to say Clara arrived alone, and they too are completely baffled by her insistence that she was with someone else. They speak to the doctor's assistant, the one who made up the medication, and he has no recollection of a young woman arriving asking for medication. So back in London, Clara is speaking to police, and they decide that maybe an idea here might be to get a therapist involved. She continues to tell the story all the time, but the police decide there's not enough here for them to actually be able to prove any wrongdoing or that anything really happened, so they close the case down. Police determine that Clara has had a major nervous breakdown, and she's sectioned. She's sent to what would have been called in those days the lunatic asylum. Clara will spend the rest of her life in the lunatic asylum. Eventually she died aged 45 from a blood clot. But never once did she ever stop telling the story of getting to Paris, going into that hotel, and her mother disappearing. So two major possible theories exist around this story. Possibly, Clara's mother was real, and she had, when they were in India, picked up some sort of disease, something deadly, something contagious, and that when the doctor and the manager realised that's what it was, they sent Clara on a wild goose chase across town to get rid of her for a couple of hours in order to dispose of the mother, change the room, and try and convince Clara that her mother had never existed with her in that hotel. Or the second theory that gets a lot of love and kind of most of the popular opinion is that actually Clara was insane. Okay, so ends story 1. Alright, here's a question I asked myself. How easy is it to be committed to an asylum? Especially then, now you're just about to go into the 1900s. Well, surprisingly easy, it turns out. I mean, you could say someone was crazy, and if a doctor or a policeman believed it, then it was off to the fucking asylum with them. See you later. And for Clara, I mean, these were the days when in an asylum the kind of procedures and experiments were all at a very, very early stage. You know, it was all to do with like measuring a person's skull and working with phrenology. I don't know if you know, well, lots of you will be, but if you're not familiar with phrenology, it was the kind of study that began at that time that basically you can look at the human skull and you can work out the size of brain that's underneath that. And from there, what you can work out is like where a person's empathy is in their brain, or where their mathematics are, their creativity, logical thinking, emotion, all of these things. So basically phrenology was about trying to create a map of the brain and go, yes, creativity sits at the front right part of the brain, or empathy is actually at the back. So that, you know, if someone was to be damaged in that part of the head, that's why they would have a lack of empathy about things. Or, you know, so lots of head experiments were working at this time to People believed that if you could just understand all of those bits of the brain, that's why you could work out if a person was mad or not. I mean, the procedures carried out by doctors were fucking barbaric. And, I mean, this is worldwide. Institutions were conducting experiments on people of all ages with all mental health problems. And, it was kind of just called madness. And it's really dark times because there wasn't really rehabilitation on the table. You went in and it was unlikely you'd come back out because you were considered either dangerous to yourself or dangerous to other people. Okay, the pretty horrible story of Clara, that's the story that's got us here in to the asylum. And now I'm going to talk to you about life in that asylum. Okay, story 2. The story of hyroids. Hyroids Asylum is in the north of England, and it was one of the largest and most famous asylums in the UK. Now, I'm not being a Britishist. No, I don't think Britishist is a word, is it? No, you know what I mean. But I think at this time, Britain were leading the way in a lot of psychiatric treatments. That a lot of other institutions around the world were watching what a lot of Britain were doing at the time. It's not to say that what they were doing was good, it's just to say that they were watching it. Anyway, it is a huge hospital. It's built during Victorian times. It's a huge, big, imposing, incredible structure. It can, and it did for years, hold up to 2,500 patients at any one time. So we'll talk about the institution, but we'll also talk about one of the women who went through the institution, and that is the story of one woman called Joan. Hyroids was a place where, and I'm quoting here from a former nurse who worked there, it was a place where people were dumped. She goes on to say, it wasn't always the voices in the head or the manic behaviour kind of people. It was just anyone deemed disturbed or who was feeling sad. And that's the people who were dumped in this institution. So we were in real trouble here with these kind of asylums, is that people would be put there for no real clear reason. An individual could be given a psychiatric evaluation by a doctor, and if there was no clear outcome, they would just be committed. I mean, of course, some people were there because, yes, they had very real psychiatric disorders, but people were also there because, well, they were there for the kind of things that right now just get treated quite calmly. Some of the reasons you could be committed to an institution like Hyroids would include things like panic attacks, agoraphobia, claustrophobia, anxiety. I mean, it's just so odd to think that you would be put away for these things. So within this particular hospital, Hyroids, let me tell you about Joan and her experience. Joan had been committed at the end of World War II. She'd lost her husband in the war, and she was struggling with anxiety. She went to see her doctor, and the doctor suggested she spend a period of time in the Hyroids mental institution. And a lot of men and women at post-war time were placed. Were they mentally ill? Were they dangerous? No. It's likely, I think, they were probably just suffering from PTSD. But this was something that was years down the line to be discovered. I mean, it was still being called shell shock. So Joan's in the institution and she starts to ask doctors, why wasn't she being allowed out? And they could never really give her a satisfactory answer. Her condition actually wasn't really that bad. It's just that she would get periods, days where she just felt a bit anxious. She would feel a bit of anxiety and she would get a bit stressed about things. But as she saw it, she didn't really understand why she needed to be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in an institution. But she was just deemed as someone with mental problems. Since being in the institution, Joan had never really once displayed any greatly odd behaviour other than, like I said, just being a bit anxious. So she's frustrated, she's bored, and one night she sees a young nurse changing the bed sheets in the ward that Joan is in. Now there's over 60 beds in one ward. So Joan goes over to the nurse and she says to her, "Can I give you a hand? Can I help you here?" And the nurse says, "Yes, actually you could. You could actually help me here." So this eventually leads to Joan helping the nurses more and more and more with tasks around the hospital. Because, as I said, she gets anxious, but she's not a danger. She isn't a real problem for anyone in the hospital. So, she's now at least got something that can kind of occupy her time. She's going around various bits of the hospital. She's helping to clean things. She's helping to just kind of organise bits and pieces. I mean, we're in sort of weird ground here because she's there as a patient and it's sort of somewhat crossing into staff member, but that's alright. Joan's doing quite well. Now, Joan, one night, I kind of love this because I sort of feel like it's what I would do. She's doing some cleaning in the hospital. She's cleaning the nurse's kitchen and she finds a bottle of gin. Gin. And she drinks it. She drinks the whole bottle. I cannot blame her. Now, at this point, she's utterly pissed out her face, right? She's drank the whole bottle of gin. And she's wandering around now the institution. And she ends up in the wrong ward. Well away from the ward that she normally was in. And she's so drunk that she can't stand up. I mean, hello, Joan. You could actually be me at this point. So she passes out unconscious. The next day, when she wakes up, she's in, get this, a fucking padded cell. She's in an actual padded cell. She's been placed here for her apparent safety and for the safety of others. Oh my God. If you were put in there every time you got drunk on gin, I'd live my life in a fucking padded cell. It's outrageous. But, okay, just to get a better perspective, really what Joan was going through didn't need this level of treatment. Joan would spend the next 30 years of her life in mental institutions. Oh. So scientists and doctors, at the time, they were experimenting with all kinds of treatments. They were trying everything with patients to work out what causes madness, how do we fix madness. And one of the things that arrived was ECT, or electroconvulsion therapy. The idea behind it being that by sending electricity through your body, you would have a fit, and the fit would somehow cure your depression. What? Were scientists getting any results? Well, slightly yes. People who suffered from depression in these institutions, they said they felt better. But how was it actually working? Well, that's what no one knew. That's what nobody could actually work out. Was it something in the brainwaves? Was it something physical to do with actually having a physical fit? What was actually making people who had depression feel better? Don't know. Were all the patients feeling the benefits of the electric currents going through their body? Fucking hell, of course not. Some were adamant at the time. It was having really serious physical effects on them. Okay, so back to Joan. Where is she? After the night of getting pissed on a bottle of gin and waking up in a padded cell, now comes the time for Joan to start receiving electroconvulsion therapy. There's some absolutely horrific examples at the time. You'll have seen, I'm sure, you might have seen this on documentaries, or you may have watched this, I don't know, in clips that go around or whatever, of nurses having to hold patients down, or patients being strapped into beds while they receive these electric currents, you know, to stop the fit, basically either harming themselves or harming a nurse or a doctor who was around them. Another treatment was the use of insulin. Insulin, of course, which plays a major part in helping those with diabetes. So, at the time, doctors had this, what I can only call fucking crackpot, insane theory that you could use insulin on someone who didn't have any diabetes, but you could use it to reset the blood sugar levels in a person's body. So essentially what you were doing was you were giving someone insulin, and it was sending them into a coma in the hope, get this, in the fucking hope that when the coma patient came round, the coma might have reset their brain. What, that the voices in their head would be gone. Your depression would be fixed by being in a coma. Oh my God. Joan was receiving the insulin therapy. She describes it as, literally, she says, it's the most horrific experience. You're injected and then you feel yourself slipping into what feels like the deepest sleep ever. And when you wake up, you don't know how long you've been asleep. You don't know what the hell is going on. You just spend the next few days feeling really foggy. 44 patients in the UK died as a result of the insulin treatment. So the next shock treatment, as they were known, is the most kind of widely known one as being a part of these institutions, and the particular place I'm talking about, Hyroids, was a real pioneer in this field, and that is the lobotomy. Psychiatrists believed that you could remove a part of the brain, and if you could just get to the right part of the brain, you could cure a patient of their ailment. And this goes back to what I was talking about with phrenology, working out which bit of the brain needs to be removed. Unfortunately, did they actually know when they bore a hole into someone's skull and that they started picking out bits of the brain? Did they know that they were getting this fucking right? No, did they fuck. They just went ahead and did it. And actually, 15,000 lobotomies were performed in the UK in the early 1950s. By the late 1950s, lobotomies were disappearing. It was becoming really clear the procedure just wasn't working, and it was resulting in either death or people being left with complete personality changes. So in the late 1950s, a doctor comes to Hyroyd's institution called Dr. MacArthur. He comes into the hospital to see the practices of doctors, to kind of just try and get an understanding of what's happening. And what he sees is some really abusive practices going on. He sees nurses slapping patients. He sees patients being drugged for days at a time to make them sleep. This one thing that he describes is just, it's horrific. It has sent me loopy with anger. He witnesses one day an elderly man in the middle of quite a agitated outburst. The old man, who I think was in his 70s, was suffering from schizophrenia, and he's making such a racket that the nurses decide the way to calm him down is to throw a bucket of cold water over him. So, when the bucket of cold water doesn't calm the schizophrenic man down, two nurses, they drag him into a shower. They completely soak him until he is soaking wet. They take him back out and they throw him down on a bed, completely soaking wet, and they leave him there. So Dr. MacArthur, he witnesses this. He goes to the aid of the old man and he gets a towel and he dries him. Now, in order to put fresh pyjamas on him, he would need the nurse to give him a key to get to a locker, etc. So he goes to the nurse and he says, "Look, I've dried the old guy off. Can you please give me the key so that I can get him some clean, dry pyjamas?" And the nurse replies, "What the fuck do you think this is? A holiday camp?" What a bitch. I mean, come on. Fucking hell. The same practices were happening in most asylums, most mental health institutions. So Joan, I'm glad to say, she's out of the padded cell. She's now just back on the ward. Joan's not allowed now to help with any tasks. She's not allowed with the nurses because she can't be trusted. She cannot be trusted that she won't go find herself another bottle of gin and get pissed. Okay, there's now going to be some big changes, some big shifts. So this is the late 1950s. Drugs were at that time being developed which would, well, I mean, I guess, go on to form how we now treat a lot of mental health, in part. Not entirely, but it did have an effect in places like Hyroyd's Asylum. The arrival of drugs to calm patients down meant that institutions were kind of being run a little bit less like prisons, because actually these patients could then just be given, I mean, essentially all you're doing is giving them a fucking tranquilizer. But that was kind of the idea, is that if you could give them a pill and it would chill them the fuck out, then that was a way to deal with mental health. And over the next few years, as it gets into the 60s, a whole range of drugs are created. And more importantly, and I do think this is a really important part of it, drugs were starting to be designed to help specific disorders. So not just, here's a pill to chill you the fuck out. It was, here's a pill to actually help you with your specific disorder. So at Hyroids, there's some changes going on. And this is really good forward thinking, considering they've just, spent the last few years carrying out some of the worst fucking practices that an asylum ever has. They now start to embrace the 60s and look forward. The patients are now given tasks to do, activities, jobs, things to focus on. I mean, I suppose it's the old term, what is the term again? Occupational therapy. It's that old kind of idea of having something to do that keeps your mind active, that means that you don't go into a depressive state because actually you're doing something else. Or if you are in a particular state of anxiety or whatever, you're using this task to focus your mind and to calm it down. Another huge development is going to happen here at Hyroids. The institution would become one of the very first in the world to open its doors and let families in to visit patients. No longer was it, let's lock up the loonies and shut the door. It was changing. It was becoming a place where families could come and go, see their uncle, their aunt, their gran, their sister, who was dealing with a mental health problem. So the conversation is changing. The conversation is developing. Something is happening. Now, I don't want to paint an overly rosy picture here. Yes, seismic changes were happening, but it didn't mean that there still weren't problems. These new wonder drugs that they were giving to patients, really all that they were doing was tranquilizing them. They weren't really helping anybody with their actual mental health problem. They were just making people sleepy. So a lot of this still needed to be overcome. A lot of it still needed to be changed. Hyroids, although I said a minute ago, was being progressive, it still clung on to some of those old barbaric practices. A patient could still come in with depression and be told, okay, well, you'll only be here for a few days, so what we're going to do is we're going to inject you with a drug, and it's just going to help you to sleep, it's just going to help you to feel a bit better. So they get pumped full of antipsychotic medication, and whilst under the influence of this, they'd sign a form, of course not knowing what they were signing, agreeing to electric shock therapy. This is the 60s. I just think that's unbelievable. Just imagine the ridiculousness of that scenario. You go to your doctor, hey doctor, I'm a little bit depressed, I'm feeling a little bit down. 24 hours later, you're strapped to a bed having fucking electricity pumped through your body. Now, the public at the time in the UK, they were becoming fully aware of the problems in these institutions, and they were starting to become vocal, beginning to protest. They were asking the UK government to make changes. Now, by the mid-1970s, these asylums, and especially Hyroids, still hadn't closed. What was happening was that doctors were referring less and less patients in to the asylums. A lot of times doctors would just actually refer you to a mental health charity, and these were kind of popping up all over the place. So the wards in some of these hospitals, they began to close. None of this is really solving anything. Yeah, a patient isn't taken in and treated horrifically, but in some cases a person who'd say had a nervous breakdown wouldn't necessarily be given the help that they actually needed, because the doctor would say, okay, you've had a nervous breakdown, what we'll do is we'll refer you to a charity here and there, and that charity couldn't always actually offer the level of support that person needed. These institutions and Hyroids was again one of the first, began in now the 1980s to discharge patients out into the community. 100,000 patients with mental health problems were discharged into communities. And the hospitals, they looked like they were on the road out. They looked like they were finally closing down for good. Where's Joan in all of this? Well, it was during the discharging of these patients at the start of the 1980s that Joan was let out of the institution for the first time in 30 years. 30 years in an institution because she had anxiety after losing her husband in the war. Just can't imagine for Joan what that was like, going back into the world after that time. The closure of lots of these wards and lots of these facilities, they happened almost overnight. It wasn't slow. It was just, right, door shut, get out. It was described as this term, this is awful, newspapers refer to it as the mad flood. Oh God, come on, the 1980s. Please try fucking harder than the mad flood. So this is where like care in the community began and people would get treatment at home. It was actually Margaret Thatcher, the then UK Prime Minister, who signed the papers which eventually closed down all of the asylums in the UK. And I mention it only because this very week, Theresa May, the current UK Prime Minister, she came under a huge attack for her lack of care about mental health services in the UK. She promised years ago that she was going to put millions into developing charities and support, and that's never happened. I mean, I know as I'm saying this that in the USA, the problems are also huge and not enough is done. In fact, show me somewhere in the world where we deal with this correctly. Alright, I'm going to close this section by just telling you how things went for Joan in the end. When she was discharged after 30 years, she was given a flat with no carpets, no cooker, no fridge, no light bulbs, and no heating. In the community where she was placed, she was referred to as Mad Joan. When she'd walk down the streets, people would shout, "Oh look, it's Mad Joan!" Parents would bring their children inside if they saw her. It's horrible. But with the help of a local charity, Joan's house is eventually sorted out. She's given furniture, a cooker, a fridge, all the things that she needs. She then gets her own community nurse and a home help to help her with her day-to-day life. But as late as the 1990s, it's becoming clear that care in the community isn't working. A lot of people who now needed to be inside of an institution because they were dangerous, either to themselves or others, were beginning to commit terrible crimes. People were being stabbed at random. Houses were being burned down by people who really needed actual 24 hours a day, 7 days a week care. But when those people reached out for help, those asylums were closing. There was nowhere for them to go. They just had to go back into the community, and the community had to look after them. Doctors were given power by the government in the UK in the 90s to force patients to take drugs to calm them down. The antipsychotic medication was back. And I mean, it just feels like such a huge step backwards. Hyroids was officially closed in 2003 and it was turned into luxury flats. And if you're thinking of buying one, it would cost you around £250,000 to live in the once famous asylum. Joan lived until the age of 78. And in an interview with the BBC weeks before she died, she said, "I'm glad I got out of that asylum, but I'll forever be known as the Mad Woman." And so ends the story of Hyroids. Okay, story 3. Adrian Schoolcraft was born in Texas in 1976. And his father was a policeman, which Adrian also dreamed of becoming. Oh, I used to dream of being in the police when I was young. That's what I wanted to do. Can you imagine? Me in a police officer's uniform, being like, "Hiya, it's Police Officer Henderson. Now you don't have to say anything or your words might be used." What is it they say? Something about, don't speak, no. Yeah, don't say anything or your words will be used against you in court. Or I don't know what it is that they say. But anyway, yeah. I think I'd have been a good police officer. I'm going to smashed it. Anyway, so there's Adrian. He's a young boy and he wants to be in the police when he grows up. Now, he gets to about 17, 18 and actually he joins the Navy first. Not really sure why he does that, but he does really well in the Navy and he receives lots of medals for his good work. Now, during the time that he's in the Navy, his parents move to New York. And when he leaves the Navy, he decides he wants to be closer to them. So he's only like 21, 22 at this point. So he moves to New York and he applies to be a part of the NYPD. He's successful. Good on you, Adrian. Gets a job and he starts to work in Brooklyn. So a few things start to happen here with Adrian which are important to note. He's not the kind of man who likes to be treated unfairly. He will speak up when he sees a problem. The term whistleblower comes to mind. Even during his time in the Navy, he was, although he did exceptionally well there, he was the first to say, "This is unfair. I'm not sure about this. Why is this happening?" Just one of those people in life who likes to ask those questions and isn't embarrassed to stand up and say, "This isn't right. I don't care if you're my employer. This isn't right." So, he's this kind of guy. So a few years into his time with the NYPD, he's doing really good police work. But like I said, he's not afraid to stand up for himself. He speaks loudly about not having enough officers in the area that he's working in. He says there's just not enough police officers for us to be able to do the job properly. He also says we're working way too many hours. We're working so many hours, we're working so much overtime, we can't possibly be good at our jobs. So those are really good things, I think, to point out. In a workplace, Happy, not happy, say something about it. But it goes deeper for Adrian. Much, much deeper. He starts to become frustrated by what he perceives to be underhand practices in the NYPD. He's seeing police officers do things, say things, which he knows they're not right. He sees officers hitting members of the public where no force was actually needed. Or he'll see an officer arrest someone for drug possession and then actually take the drugs off them and keep them for personal use. Underneath all of this also is Adrian's frustration at the way he hears his fellow officers talk about people. The terms that they use to describe people, the words that they use are awful. At the time, Adrian was in a largely black community, and he says this, which I think sums up what I'm trying to say. I worked in a black community, and you can think of the word that I'm saying was being used all the time by my fellow officers. So what does Adrian decide to do? Well, he decides he's going to secretly record the daily conversations between him and the other officers and capture as evidence just how bad some of the police practices were. So for months, he is recording the officers. They are completely unaware that this is happening. Adrian, at this time, is still being quite vocal about the fact that he's overworked. He says the force is taking on too many cases. Everybody is stretched to their limit. And he receives a note in his locker one day that says, if you don't like it, get another job. He's then demoted to a desk job in the force. And when he goes to his manager to complain, the manager says, look, I think you're having psychiatric problems. You're depressed. You're stressed. You're anxious. Adrian's like, no, I'm not. I'm just telling you, there's lots of things here that are wrong. You're making us work too many hours. You're giving us way too many cases. I'm not stressed. I'm not depressed. I'm telling you, these are the fundamental problems within this workplace. But that's cast aside. Adrian's told, nah, you're depressed. Nah, you're stressed. You're just not coping. So you remember I said his dad worked in the police force. Well, his dad actually had done really well and reached like detective level. I mean, he was now retired, but he was trying to help his son with these tapes. He knew that Adrian was taping these conversations, and his dad fully believed in this because, much like Adrian, his dad was a big supporter of let's expose corruption. Let's wipe it out. Let's just do what we can. Okay, we have a duty to stop this happening. Let's do what we can. So in a secret meeting with a retired officer from the NYPD, his dad, and a lawyer, Adrian plays the tapes. He lets them hear every conversation that he's had with his fellow officers, in which it is so evident that they are racist, they're homophobic, they are despicable, the way that they talk about people is just awful. So the tapes are played. Now somehow, don't know how this happens, but the meeting and the tapes, they end up leaked and now everyone knows what Adrian has done. Now, do you think this goes down well in the police? No, of course not. Adrian begins to get harassed on a daily basis at work. And here is where this story links back to what this whole episode is about. The police around him decide Adrian is mentally unwell. Now, we know he's not, but in what I can only imagine was a meeting titled "Fuck, how do we get out of this situation?" someone had the bright idea, I know, let's say he's crazy. So one evening, Adrian is still working his desk job and he asks to go home early. He isn't having a good day. I mean, he's the most hated man on the force at this point. So his manager says, yeah, okay, go home. He goes back to his house and he takes a sleeping tablet and he goes to sleep. At 6 o'clock, he's woken up by a phone call. Well, it's the phone is just repeatedly ringing and ringing and ringing, and it's his dad. And his dad says, look out of the window of your house. And when Adrian looks out, he sees police are starting to gather on the street. He recognises these officers. Some of these officers were part of his team of officers. And he thinks, shit. He then starts to hear noises from upstairs. Now, no one lives upstairs, so why there would be noises, no one knows. 2 police officers, using a key that they'd obtained from Adrian's landlord, enter his property. Just before they come in, Adrian turns on 2 recording devices in the house. He knows he's going to have to record this conversation. The officers tell Adrian that they're taking him to a nearby hospital, and of course he's hesitant. As far as he's concerned, he doesn't really need the hospital. Yeah, I mean, he feels a bit anxious, he feels a bit stressed. Who wouldn't? There's police standing outside of your house. There's 2 police officers in your house, and you are the most hated man in your police force. So yeah, of course, your blood pressure is going to be up. So Adrian agrees, okay, I could go to a hospital and I could get my blood pressure checked. That's fine. Once travelling to the hospital, Adrian realises they're not going to your general hospital. The officers are taking him to a mental health facility. And he's like, okay, where the hell am I going? What's happening here? The 2 officers who came into his flat, they said, we're taking you for your own safety and for the safety of others into a mental health institution. He tries to argue, but he's overpowered, and the officers succeed in getting Adrian committed that very evening. Right, this is just weird, and it adds to it. The staff at the hospital write a report, as they do on any new kind of patient that comes in. And the report on Adrian says, he is expressing questionable, paranoid ideas of conspiracy and cover-ups happening in his workplace. He has started collecting evidence to prove his point, and he is suspicious that they are after him. These are delusions. Adrian is suffering from severe delusions. Adrian's dad tracks him down in the hospital and he tries his very best to explain to staff, look, my son does not need to be in this facility. He doesn't need to be here. This is a cover-up. But Adrian remains in the facility for 4 full days, handcuffed to the bed. His dad goes on to fight for his freedom, and eventually Adrian is freed. Once he's out, he decides to file a lawsuit. I think he was offered a settlement by the NYPD, but he stated, there is not enough money in this state to get me to settle this suit. It's going to trial and there's no way around that. The truth has to come out. So in the end, 2 lawsuits are filed. One against the hospital and one against NYPD. In total, Adrian receives $600,000 in compensation for the mess. There were internal charges made against some of the officers involved. I think it was 10 charges in total that were issued. Adrian was dismissed from the NYPD without pay. And so ends the story of Adrian Schoolcraft. Okay, that's the end of the stories. But of course it's not the end of the discussion. How could it be? On deciding on this subject, I thought long and hard about what areas to cover, and to be honest, this would have ended up being a marathon podcast if I'd been able to tell all of the stories that I want to tell. Because of course, there is success in the world of mental health. There are good doctors, there are good nurses, good practices, and millions of people, millions upon millions, live with mental health problems successfully in their lives and do really well. I mean, it's not all doom and gloom. I don't know if you saw this on the Facebook group, but I think I put it on Twitter, and I don't think I put it on Instagram, but I will. There's a UK project called CAM, and last week they staged a huge, amazing art installation on top of our London building. They put up 84 dummies, all dressed in male clothes, and they placed them at the edge of a building. It's such an arresting image. I mean, it really kind of hits you when you look at it. And the reason that they did it is because 84 men a week in the UK kill themselves because of mental health. And I don't want to sound preachy. I don't want to sound like a dick. But if you need help, if you're not sure about your mental health, you're feeling anxious, you're feeling whatever, please reach out. Please reach out to a charity or a doctor, because they're out there. They are actually out there. I mean, I think it's brilliant that we're at the place where actually we're far enough into the mental health discussion that what we can say is, just by starting to talk about it, you're already making great progress. For me, being able to talk about mental health is just so important. It's just being able to, if you can just find the way, find the person that will listen to, just, you know, it's kind of something that can never, well, just speaking out loud, just saying out loud the things that are going around your brain, or those doubts, or those feelings, or those thoughts, those things that are really causing you to want to just go to your bed sometimes, you know, those things. It's just, and give people those opportunities. Please, if I could ask you one thing as a human being. Just give someone that opportunity. Let them talk. Let them tell you their feelings. Because it's just so important. And I encourage it in so many ways that I possibly can. I guess sometimes it's often the way, right? This will often happen to me. So I'll go out to a party, or go out to, drinks with friends, or I'll go out and it can be anywhere, it can be a workplace, but more often than not, it tends to be I'm out on a night out. Quite often I meet people for the first time, and it'll be the very first time that I meet them, and by the end of that night, that person will literally have given me their whole entire story. They'll have given me their feelings, they'll have given me their thoughts about anything, and it's not because, please don't think this, it's not that there's nothing manipulative about me going, I love people's stories. Of course I fucking love people's stories. You know fine well that I do. But I also think, one thing, this is, oh my God, it sounds like how much can I wank all over myself here anymore? I'm just saying, what I think I'm good at is giving people time and space to unload their problems on me. And I can quite often sense in someone when they just need to share their anxiety, or share their stress, or share their worries. I'm not saying I'm the person who can fix those things, and I'm not saying I'm the person who knows what to do with them, but what I'm saying is I'm the person who can listen to them and not judge, and just listen to them for listening, because actually sometimes listening is really all that you need to do. Anyway, sorry, that's all going to be a bit preachy. So I'll wind up this episode by saying, as always, thank you for your responses to the stories, for your emails, for your gifts. I appreciate them all. Now, I've never done this before, so I'm going to do it for the first time, right? I've never read a review out before. And I'm not going to read the whole entire thing, right? Because that would just be a wee bit self-celebrating. That's not really what I want. That's not the point of this. The point of this is Anna O- wrote a lovely review on the Facebook page. And there's just something in it that she says that I just think, okay, I want to share this. So she starts, "Hi Barry, the podcast is great. I love the storytelling." And she says, "The storytelling is great, but aside from that, it's the community feeling of the podcast that sets it aside from the others. If you want to get involved, you can, and the Facebook group is a safe place where only nice people go, and I have faith that it will stay that way." Now, Anne could not be more right in that review. It's kind of incredible. I know I go on about the Facebook group all the time at the end of every episode, and if you are not a Facebook user, you must be wanting to bang your head against the wall right now, because I keep mentioning it all the time. But I honestly can't tell you what a wonderful, wonderful group of people it is. Like, this week, I asked on social media, on all social medias, not just the Facebook group, I asked it on Twitter and Instagram. I said, can you help me? I'm trying to create, and this is for a future episode, I'm trying to create a long list of every brilliant thing in the world and in your life. And my God, did people come forward. I mean, the last time I checked the Facebook comments, there was over 200 comments from people, and they were writing the longest lists in the world, and every one of them I went through and I read. And I thank you so much for getting in touch with all of that kind of stuff. But I think Anne is right there. This is, maybe you're a bit like, at this moment, right, Barry, you've told us the stories, do you want to like fuck off and stop talking? Right, okay, I get that, but I just want to say this. This is what where I want Extraordinary Stories podcast to go, you'll hopefully have worked out from these episodes so far that what I want this to be a collaborative thing. I don't want this to just be me. There's a million and one podcasts out there where someone will sit down and they will tell you their opinion on a crime, and they will say these are the facts and this is what happened. And you know what? I listen to all of those and I love them. They're great. It's just not what I'm about. I'm about, let's try and make this a collaborative experience. I want your stories. I want to share these things with you. Yeah, I don't want this to just be a one-way relationship. This has to be a group feeling. This has to be a bigger group feeling. That sounds like I'm talking shit, actually, about other podcasts, and I'm not. I would never do that. There's so many fucking podcasts out there that I love who do true crime. I would say probably maybe better than me. They do true crime better than me. You know, they will research every single bullet that was shot in a murder, and they'll be able to tell you the diameter of this blood wound and whatever, and that's fine. But those are great, and I listen to those. That's what. Well, I would never be doing podcasts if I hadn't listened to those. But what I'm saying is, I want this to be a big community. I just want us to be a big, massive community. Okay? I feel like I've said the word community 372 times. I might have. Who knows? Okay. Anyway, folks, I'm out of here. As always, if you want to get in touch, there's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's Instagram, and until the middle of the week, my friends, okay? Goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over. Let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.